Your movie is called Hobgoblins.
This time we watched Season 9, Episode 7, Hobgoblins.
In which some creepy little monster puppets help you live out your wildest fantasies and then kill you.
Oh, but first, some Halloween-y follow-up, because this is our Halloween episode where everything's going to be said in this kind of voice.
I really hope not, because I don't know if I could sustain this.
We've got some follow-up from listener Adam.
But not Adam.
No, that Adam, the one who used to talk with me on this show regularly.
Aw, hi Adam.
Yeah, Adam writes in after our, you guessed it, Donald Pleasance episode celebration last time to say, fun fact, Bob Clark's A Christmas Story is stolen single-handedly by Hangar 18 star Darren McGavin as the old man. Okay, now, Darren McGavin, you might remember, played one of the NASA officials.
I didn't remember that, but thank you for the reminder.
Now, when I had been doing my research on this, I realized that Darren McGavin also played Kolchak the Night Stalker, which is one of Adam's favorite shows. We discussed it on episode 56, and I thought about mentioning it, but it didn't seem that necessarily exciting, and we had a lot of familiar faces that episode.
That's true.
But, you know, this added bit that he was the old man on the Christmas Story, which is to say the father, right? You've seen A Christmas Story, right?
I haven't seen A Christmas Story for a very long time, because when they started putting it on, like, 24 hours for like the day of Christmas Eve, I just couldn't handle it anymore. There's only so many times I can hear, you'll poke your eye out, you'll poke your eye out. And there's only so many times you can see that leg lamp. There's only so many times you can go and have Chinese food instead of having a home cooked meal. I don't know. It's too, or the tongue on the pole. Like that just skeeves me out every time.
Well, he's the one who gets the leg lamp.
Oh, okay. Well, you know. He did get the leg lamp.
He did get the leg lamp. No, it's a good performance. He does a good job in that one.
Oh, yeah.
We also got a message from Ned, who has been writing in a bit more lately, or writing on our Patreon Discord, I should say. Ned, of course, from By the Bywater, our Tolkien podcast here on Megaphonic. Anyway, Ned writes in to remind us that Aaron Gray, who got mentioned in the Shaw 13 as part of Aaron Gray's Cellulite show. Cellulite show, something like that, has been in an MST3K episode, specifically in the opening of Reptilicus.
Oh, so you're not saying she was an actress in one of the movies that got riffed. You're saying she was actually on the show, like on the set.
Yes, as Ned reminds me, and I should have remembered this, she's the one with Will Wheaton in those bits at the start of Reptilicus setting up Jonah's backstory.
Oh. Does that mean she's the one right next to him when he's saying, like, what a rebel, or whatever it is that he says about Jonah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't have strong memories of that scene. I didn't really enjoy it, but, you know, she's there, and I should have remembered that. My bad.
It's all right. It's hard for me to see past Will Wheaton. I think I've had a crush on him since Star Trek The Next Generation, before I was age 10. So, you know, it's hard for me to see the scene around him.
Star Trek The Next Generation started well after you were age 10.
You're telling me that started after 85?
87 is when it started, yeah.
God, it's such a pillar of my childhood. I can't remember a time I didn't have a crush on Will Wheaton. Sometimes we remember our history differently because there's such a defining moment. And I think his gray sweater on The Next Generation might be a defining moment of my childhood.
Well, I look forward to the letters we get about that next episode. But let's get to the point and talk about our very Halloween-y movie, Hobgoblins.
All right. This time we watch Season 9, Episode 7, Hobgoblins. Mr. McCready has been working night security on the old movie lot for decades. never missed a day, and certainly has trained a number of assistants over the years. No one seems to be able to handle the job, and that includes his newest assistant, Kevin. Kevin is a whiny man with a prudish girlfriend, Amy, who is afraid of everything. She constantly needs Kevin to prove his manliness, and they watch tame movies together. Amy has a friend, Daphne, who is very horny for all men, but especially her army boyfriend, Nick. They only watch movies with at least one X in them. This foursome has a friend, Kyle, who likes to wear red shorts and call phone sex lines with strange animal-related monologues. One evening, Kevin proves he is really bad at security guarding. To the disappointment of Mr. McCready and the surprise of no one watching this movie, Kevin has released the creatures Mr. McCready has been secretly guarding all these years, the hobgoblins. They seem so yucky at first, and then they get inside a person's head and make their wildest fantasies come true, until that person dies horribly in that fantasy. Clearly, their presence will wreak havoc on the city unless they are captured or killed. Mr. McCready is too old to save everyone, so he sends out Kevin. With a creature like this, of course, there are rules. Rule number 1. They're attracted to bright lights. Actually, I think that's the only rule. And I guess you have to kill the hobgoblin to make the fantasy stop and save their completely willing but unwitting victim. Kevin's friend group each fall prey to the hobgoblins. Daphne fantasizes about her boyfriend coming home. Kyle's phone sex lady comes to the house to take him out in real life. Amy does a public striptease at Club Scum and starts making out with the club bouncer. Nick throws a lot of grenades because he is super good at army, dude. Kevin gets into a fight with a local thug and impresses Amy, but all these fantasies are thwarted before anyone in this plucky group of friends dies. They do, however, leave a path of destruction along the way back to the movie studio. While Kevin's been gallivanting about town, Mr. McCready has been fired from his job, despite 30 years of keeping hobgoblins under wraps. So when the hobgoblins return to their home at the studio, Mr. McCready blows the place up, calls his former boss to tell him, and lets the boss know that since there was no one on duty when the blast happened, no one can file that insurance paperwork. No one lives out their fantasy quite like old Mr. McCready. The end.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, you remember that Robert Palmer song, I Didn't Mean to Turn You On? Well over a decade after that song was popular, Mike and the bots find themselves accidentally turning each other on all the time. But sometimes, when they're feeling frustrated, they do it on purpose, as you do. Anywho, remember how last time we watched a KTMA episode and the bots acted like toddlers, and we talked about how they aged up in later years? Well, this time Mike and the bots are jumping up and down on a brand new couch that Pearl got at the rent-to-own. They're even squirting juice out of the straws in their juice boxes, and you know that's gonna stain. Pearl laments that this is why she can't have nice things. Mike and Tom take a break to read Charles Dickens' Bleak House and Richard Scarry's What Do People Do All Day, respectively, when Crow interrupts them. He's been inspired by the bad views this film has about women to make an educational short, Let's Talk Women. Alas, Crow has never actually met a woman, and he isn't sure they really exist. Although, when he's reminded that he's met Pearl, this does nothing to change his mind. Crow sets up a crisis hotline for people who've been traumatized by watching the film Hobgoblins. Bobo calls, but his problem isn't related to hobgoblins at all. Turns out he's in love with a chimpanzee named Emily who doesn't know that Bobo exists. Crow, disgusted by this interspecies romance, hangs up on him. At some point during the movie, Mike sets up some cardboard cutouts of himself and the bots in the theater, and then plays a tape of them making low-effort riffs in an attempt to escape the rest of the movie and enjoy a little island time. I guess they also set some cutouts on the bridge to sing a low-effort song about hobgoblins. But Brain Guy figures out the ruse, so womp womp. During the closing credits, Tom interviews a cardboard cutout of Rick Sloan, the director of Hobgoblins, and has Crow do his voice. The interview is full of questions like, when you came up with the idea for Hobgoblins, were you high on crack? Which, honestly, isn't that much more clever than the cardboard cutouts jokes. But Tom isn't done, so once they're out of the theater, Tom's dressed up like the Terminator. He's gone back in time to prevent Sloan from making the film by kicking his shin. Which, in this new timeline, turns out to be exactly what inspires Sloan to make Hobgoblins. Womp womp. Back in Castle Forrester, Bobo and Brain Guy are bouncing on the couch. Pearl laments that this is why she can't have nice things. What do you think, sirs?
Womp womp. Womp womp. Nobody gets what they want.
We're back in season 9 after a brief foray away. What's it like to be back?
It's fine, I guess. I have to say, I did actually really enjoy this episode. Is that bad? Is that good? I don't know. Did you enjoy the episode, Chris?
I did, yeah.
Oh, good.
It's a pretty good episode. I mean, it's still a season 9 episode.
Sure, there's still some unfortunate riffs that happen and some really just weird sketches. But, like, they chose a movie that really lent itself well to riffing, and they did a pretty darn good job, I thought.
Yeah. No, I think the movie is perfect for them, and they did a good job riffing, I should say. Absolutely. Yeah, it's perfectly nice, good episode, good job. Yeah.
Good job.
Good job. Yeah.
I don't think that I necessarily thought this movie was all that Halloween-y in terms of being spooky and all those stuff. So, maybe we had to change our voices at the top of the episode because we weren't really moving into a big spooky land right now. But, I liked the cardboard cutouts, especially because the cardboard cutouts that they put in the theater are the cardboard cutouts that are at the bottom of the Gizmoplex sign-in screen, right? And it's the one that's at the bottom of the MST3K, the movie poster and everything. I mean, it is
the iconic shape. Yeah, they were already putting that shape on bumper stickers and all that by that point, so they knew exactly what they were doing.
Totally. And it was the shape that at MST3Con, there was a man who came in costume with those cardboard cutout shapes next to him, and that was his costume. When he sat down in the theater, he needed 3 seats, one for himself and one for his 2 bot cutouts. It was lovely.
It was. The cardboard cutouts seem significantly larger than Mike and the Bots, but that's fine. That's fine.
Well, that makes it easier to sneak out, right? Because if it was smaller than them, then it would look weird when you left. But if you put the cardboard cutout behind you, then you can just leave and no one notices.
So you say this isn't a scary movie, but on paper it should be. It's about little gremlin-y creatures that cause people to die through enacting their fantasies. It should be spooky. I agree, it's not, but it seems like it should be.
Yes, actually, that was one of the things I was going to ask you is is this actually a premise that lends itself well to a horror movie? Because these people die in their fantasies, but I'm not being moved psychologically to be like, oh my God, this is messing with my brain, right? I don't have that kind of a reaction to it. And I don't have a reaction of oh my gosh, there's so much body horror and there's so much gross out stuff happening. It's more just this person starts acting weird because they're living out a fantasy in their head and then they smash their head on the wall or something because they tripped. Or what else happens to people inside of this? Oh, the car's gonna go over the cliff, but the hobgoblin's not even good at pushing the car off the cliff. I don't know. But it doesn't even really achieve funny hilarity like the movie it's trying to spoof, like Gremlins, right? Gremlins is a movie that clearly this thing is trying to be, and Gremlins has comedy moments as well as these scary horror moments, and Hobgoblins just never really achieves either.
Right. Well, I think we're going to talk about Gremlins in just a little bit. Yeah. So I don't want to preempt that conversation, but I will say that the fundamental idea that getting what you want can be a horror is, I mean, I'm no horrorologist, right? But my sense is like that is a common trope, like the monkey's paw idea. You make a wish and your wish is granted and it's the worst thing that could ever happen to you. And that's where some of the horror comes from. Like, that's a thing. That's part of the tradition this movie is sort of playing with. But you're absolutely right. This movie is not really...
It doesn't do it well.
Well, I don't even know if it's trying to do it.
Yeah, I don't know. And that's the thing. It's such a mishmash because it's not like there's something wrong with your fantasy or, it's enacted in a way such that it becomes, like the Twilight Zone episode where the guy is like, I want to be the ultimate power on a very small country so that I'm in charge of everything. And then like the genie makes him Hitler, right? And it's like, oh crap, that's not what I want, right? It's not something that exposes that your fantasies are bad. Which is part of what sometimes that monkey's paw thing does for you, right? Is you realize that your fantasies are actually super destructive. It's more just like, here I am living out my fantasy and oops, an accident just occurred and now I'm not alive anymore. Like it's not a compelling way for us to be able to, analyze our fantasies and the impact that they have on ourselves or the people around us if they were to occur in real life. So we don't get that pushing of our minds to really think about how horrific sometimes our fantasies can be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but you're asking a lot of this movie that it's not interested in doing. This movie isn't trying to be good in that sense. It isn't trying to think hard about what wish fulfillment means. It's trying to be a kind of cheeky, silly, metatextual joke that is playing off all sorts of tropes from other movies and is winking to the audiences and encouraging people to put in over-the-top performances like the MC or like the sex phone worker.
Yes, but that can also be done really, really well, right? It's important to note that MC was not under the influence of a hobgoblin. That's him in real life.
Yes.
That sex worker on the phone who was having the like, oh, here's this snake that's on my leg. Please, animal tender, help me. Like, that wasn't a hobgoblin influence. That was her in real life. It was her showing up in spandex that was the hobgoblin influence. So the best parts of those over-the-top performances are not even hobgoblin inspired. That's just real life.
Exactly. Well, I think that's what the movie's trying to do. It's trying to be silly. It's trying to have fun. And it's trying to make a cheap movie that might be entertaining to people. It's not trying to actually scare you. That's my sense of what the Rick Sloan vibe is with his movies from what I've read about him. I don't know. I could be wrong. But my sense is that he's just trying to get his friends together and make a silly movie and hopefully not lose his shirt in the process.
Yeah. Could have been better.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's part of what Mystery Science Theater is looking for, though, right? Is like, okay, yeah, there's this director who's putting together this movie, and he sort of has an idea. He kind of doesn't execute it very well, maybe. And, it's not terrible to watch.
Yeah.
Entirely.
I think it's exactly as good to watch as the director intended, let's say.
Wow. I don't know. I guess I always hope that people are shooting a little bit higher,
Not every director wants to do that.
No, that's true.
I mean, I could be wrong, but that's my sense. So yeah, as you say, this movie, I don't know, seems inspired by Gremlins.
What? Because it has like a creepy looking puppet creature that wreaks havoc on humankind? Is that what you're suggesting?
Hey, here's a fun fact about the hobgoblin puppets.
Uh-huh.
They had so little budget and so little time to make the puppets that the guy who made the puppets could only make one of them with a mouth that moved.
Oh, wow.
That's why all the rest just sort of sit there in the back of the car when they're driving around.
Ah, that makes sense. I mean, and they all look exactly the same. It's not like, to bring up the movie Gremlins right away, right? Gremlins has all of these separate animals or puppets, and they all have their own different personalities, and they all have their own different looks. Even when there are thousands of them, there's many of them that have different looks and different coloring and things like that. And it's not impossible to be able to achieve something like that, whereas the hobgoblins are basically like little stuffed animals. They're just kind of hanging out. You can wrestle them. It's great.
I believe I also read that the hobgoblins in this movie were originally just supposed to just be sort of like glowing eyes, like just a disembodied effect.
Oh my gosh.
But then Gremlins came out, and the entire way the movie was going to be framed changed.
Man, that's kind of a shame because you could see this movie maybe having a little bit more of a disquieting effect if there wasn't actually a funny looking stuffed animal chasing after everybody,
Yeah,
because
maybe.
the Gremlins does a really good job of having creepy looking puppets and showing just enough of them to make it creepy, right? Like you see Mogwai, you see Gizmo as the cute little fluffy thing, and the cute little fluffy thing gets wet, and you have all of these other cute little gizmos that come out, and then they become gremlins because, they trick everybody and they get to eat after midnight, and you see their cocoons, and you have the fog machine going and everything, but you don't see the gremlins for a really long time. You hear them, you see everybody reacting to how weird everything looks. Maybe you see a gremlin hand reaching out to like poke somebody, but it's a while before you actually see the gremlins. And that buildup of the anticipation makes a big difference in terms of having that slight discomfort and fear before they actually come on screen.
Yeah, I mean, that's a thing that horror movies do. Again, I don't really watch the genre, but my understanding is that this is a common thing to hold the monster back for quite a while. And I don't know, I find that cheap. Just show the monster.
Oh,
Just show us the monster. First frame. It's good.
No, I mean,
I paid to see the monster.
yeah, but the monster doesn't have any payout for you unless you have some sort of an expectation for what the impact of the monster is going to be. Like Gizmo's cute, the gremlins are effing creepy, like they're creepy. They are not cute. But it's the same thing. I mean, Stranger Things does a similar thing inside of their first season where there's all of these episodes where they're talking about the Demogorgon, right? But you never see it. You see evidence of it until like halfway through the season. And then once you see it, it's like, oh my God, that thing is so scary. And the rest of the whole thing just plays out like monsters are chasing you and we have to defeat the monster. Like part of that horror vibe is killed at that point in time because you have an object to focus your action on. It's different rather than having that feeling of discomfort of, I don't know what's going to happen next. And Gremlins does a way better job at this than Hobgoblins does.
Really?
I know, it's shocking.
I haven't seen Gremlins since I was a kid, so I don't remember much except that Gizmo was cute.
Yeah, and that the Gremlins are creepy.
Yeah, that's true. I think there's an old man in it who's creepy as well.
Yes, because he's foreign.
Oh, maybe.
Uh-huh. And they give him like one milky eye and one not milky eye. And he has, he has an unusual lair full of things that are unrecognizable to somebody who's not familiar with Asian cultures.
Oh.
Right, because they're shopping in Chinatown. That's where they pick up the Mogwai.
Oh, that's right.
So they're also playing on Americans' fear of foreigners.
In an 80s movie?
I know. Stop it, right?
Oh, who knew?
I know, right? Mm-hmm. Which is why they have to rename the Mogwai Gizmo. I can't call him Mogwai the whole time, right? Anyway, that's aside from just the creature horror, but the whole buildup of the Gremlins movie is a lot of, you see shadows of gremlins. You see lights and action like that when the water's creeping on the gremlins and you know that more gremlins are being reproduced, but you don't actually have to see it to feel that, oh my, what's happening? How are we going to be able to defeat them when there's thousands and thousands and not just one? So it's just well done with that.
So I had thought that was the path that Hobgoblins was going to take in that scene where they escape and like you see the security guard and our hero, Kevin or whatever his name is, watching them leave the vault, but you don't actually get to see them on camera. And I thought, oh, okay, it's going to be one of those movies. And then like two seconds later, you actually see them. So I was like, oh, no, never mind. I guess that's a funny disruption of the trope. Maybe that's a joke. I can't tell this movie. So, okay, they do a better job with the reveal. They also have better puppets and a greater variety of puppets. And they have more rules about what could turn a cute little mogwai into a nasty little gremlin. Are there any other things that Hobgoblin steals from Gremlins?
So Hobgoblins has whole movie sequences where we're trying to defeat the hobgoblin, right? Where we know we have to either kill the hobgoblin or at least interrupt its control over somebody. Otherwise, their fantasy is going to reach a point where they die, right? So Gremlins also has that whole like people have to fight with puppets. We're not reacting to a green screen. We actually have to, in some way, interact with and defeat this enemy. And Hobgoblins has that as well.
In Gremlins, do they also roll around on the ground, hugging onto a puppet for dear life?
I mean, there are scenes where you have the actor holding on to the gremlin, right? So they're definitely shaking the puppet a little bit. But there's also some sense that the puppets that are the gremlins actually have more of their own movement. They're not just a stuffed animal that's sitting on a seat in a golf cart. It's something that's pushing the buttons on the blender or throwing knives at your mother. You know, like the gremlins are actually doing something that's physically intimidating, whereas the hobgoblins are messing with something that's happening in your mind. And it seems like that should be terrifying in an entirely different way. But once the hobgoblins are interacting with somebody's mind, somebody outside the fantasy really only has to hit a hobgoblin with a rake before everything disappears. Whereas with gremlins, like, that's not what's happening. Like, you kill that gremlin, you just had the wrestling match of your life and you're bleeding and stuff, right? And there's still more of them out there.
Hobgoblins doesn't do a very good job of distinguishing between it's fantasy and it's not fantasy. It doesn't do a good job of saying, here's where the fantasy is starting, here's the hobgoblin causing it. Like, think about Munchie, which I know we haven't talked about yet, but in Munchie, you see every time Munchie does a little movement to cause something to happen.
Yeah, it's true.
And so everything is motivated in that sense. In this movie, I found myself wondering all the time, like, wait, is this a dream sequence? Is this not? Because they just don't motivate anything because it's not a well-made movie. But, you know, surprise, surprise, it's not a well-made movie. That's okay.
No, it's true.
Again, I don't think it's trying to be one.
No, there are a couple of times that I think they do a better job, like when when Kyle's fantasy about the phone sex operator actually being his girlfriend starts. There is a kind of a click and a change in the voice in the phone sex operator. And then he goes to the front door and opens the door and she's there in a cloud of 80s music video smoke, right? So you do feel that sense of something's changed and we're in a fantasy. But I don't have that sense when Daphne goes outside looking for Nick. It's like, was that a fantasy or not a fantasy? I don't even know. Why is Amy doing a striptease? Is this her fantasy? If so, what are all these other people doing here? Because everyone else's fantasy is alone. So you have Gremlins versus Hobgoblins. Gremlins does a lot of things a little bit better in terms of your anticipation. The puppets are better. The acting's better. And the action also wraps up nicer. Right at the end of Hobgoblins, the Hobgoblins just go back to the movie studio. Like, why did we chase them all around LA trying to kill them if they were just going to come back anyway, you know? Whereas at the end of Gremlins, it's like, you really have to stop this thing or it's just going to keep causing havoc. And they do end up having to stop it.
Well, I think the reason they have to be chased back to the movie studio is because Rick Sloan got his hands on some stock footage of an explosion at a warehouse.
That is so true.
And he needed to work it in. Like, that's one of his things. The car that's tumbling down the side of the hill that explodes, that's not the same car as Mike and the Bots notice.
Yes, it's true.
But it's a pretty good matched shot to have that kind of scene in there. Like, And similarly, yeah, they don't have good characters because that's not what Rick Sloan's interested in. Like, he's interested in, like, playing with tropes. So all the characters are going to be super tropey.
Yeah, but then you could do something with those tropes when you're looking at their fantasies, right? Like, Daphne's fantasy and Amy's fantasy could be far more interesting than they end up being if you're trying to play with tropes or even reinforce tropes.
But then you'd have to hire good actors.
It's true.
It doesn't work. It's too much overhead. It's way better to just put a movie out there where everything is dumb as and then you could just have fun hanging out with people and making a stupid movie and getting everybody to make silly faces.
But there are ways to be able to make that happen and have it be a little bit more compelling and entertaining. They made choices. And they made both of these movies, Gremlins and Hobgoblins, made really interesting choices when they decided to do sequels as well. So I kind of want to talk about the sequels a little bit.
So I don't know anything about Gremlins 2, and the only thing I know about Hobgoblins 2 comes from watching a little mini documentary they made around the time that they made Hobgoblins 2, and I think it was 2009?
Which is shockingly late for making a Hobgoblins sequel. I mean, no one should know Hobgoblins who's watching Hobgoblins 2, right?
Well, except that Hobgoblins, you may not know this, was featured on a little show called Mystery Science Theater 3000. And so just like Demon Squad, through the momentum that they gained from it being on MST3K, they were able to raise enough interest and funds to make a sequel.
And when they made a sequel, Chris, what did they choose to do? They kept the same 5 character stereotypes for the main 5 characters. Kevin is still ridiculous in exactly the same way. You still have Kyle, except it's not phone sex anymore. Now it's internet porn. You still have Daphne, who's oversexed and dressed like she's still in the 80s. You have Nick, who's still like army guy and is like dumb as rocks. And then you have the girlfriend who is a stuck-up prude, right? It's the same 5 stereotypes. Mr. McCready is back in a home for the criminally insane because he blew up the movie studio claiming there were hobgoblins inside. So Mr. McCready's story is continuing, but all of the other characters from the first movie are back with no knowledge of the events of the first movie, and now they're college students who are learning psychiatry from the psychiatrist who's in charge of this home for the criminally insane. And all of the really awesome tropes about treating people who have mental illnesses are on display in this 2009 classic.
Amazing. I mean,
amazing.
So I know that Rick Sloan specifically set out to recreate as many shots as he could from the original Hobgoblins. And the preview shows off a few of the, cars blowing up and other things happening that are so memorable. He said if MST3K made fun of the scene, he made sure to put it in the second movie.
Oh my gosh, you have got to be kidding me.
Well, and I don't know if you noticed it or not, but in the trailer, and I'm told in the movie, they sing the Hobgoblin song that Cardboard Cutout Mike and the bots sing during the segment.
I don't remember it happening in the movie. That's hilarious. I'm not going back to watch it again.
It's definitely in the trailer.
For anybody who wants to watch it, you can find it streaming for free. It's Halloween. It's out there. I will talk about one of the interesting things that they do in Hobgoblins 2, though.
Okay.
In the first Hobgoblins movie, the Hobgoblins have you live out your fantasy and you die in your fantasy.
Right.
In Hobgoblins 2, the Hobgoblins send you into a pit of your deepest fear.
Ooh.
And in order to defeat the Hobgoblin, you have to face your fear and no longer be afraid.
Oh, that's better.
It's better, right? It's a little bit more thoughtful in terms of what is the Hobgoblin doing and how are you defeating it. Now it's not just I hit it with a rake. It's I have to think about what the Hobgoblin's doing in my mind, and I have to do something there in order to defeat the Hobgoblin. So that's what they do when they're going through this, right? Like the guy who's, maxing out his credit card on the internet, looking at internet porn. Because I guess his fantasy was to have a connection. And so his fear is that there will never be a connection. So he cuts the credit card and is just like, I'm done with this. And that defeats the hobgoblin in that case.
Huh.
So that's the second movie. It's a little like that's a different premise. It's not well executed, Chris. It's just as bad as the first Hobgoblins movie. It's super tropey. There's a man who gets a lobotomy and he becomes wise after the lobotomy. It's very strange.
And does it steal things from Gremlins 2?
So it doesn't. So the main thing that happens in Gremlins 2 is that instead of being inside of this small idyllic town, you're now inside of an office building that is completely automated inside of New York City. That's where Gremlins 2 takes place. And there's a genetic splicing laboratory run by Christopher Lee inside of this building. And they get a hold of Gizmo and they start doing weird genetic tests on everything that they have in the lab, including getting some blood and stuff from Gizmo, right? So when the gremlins happen because Gizmo gets wet, and then they eat. They're in an office building. There's food all over the place. They just choose to eat after midnight. It's now no longer our fault. Anyway, they go to this genetic laboratory and they start drinking the weird potions, which make them into different characters. And so that's what happens with gremlins. They're no longer just weird looking beasts that are out to destroy everything. One of them drinks a potion and becomes a spider gremlin.
Oh, like into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah, more like Shelob in the Lord of the Rings series, right?
Okay.
They have one who becomes electricity.
Right.
Somehow. But they also have one that drinks a vegetable potion and is now a gremlin made out of vegetables. They have one that becomes super femme and grows boobs and has big, lips. It's like the Miss Piggy of gremlins, right? But they have all of these, and then they have one that drinks a brain juice and becomes super smart. And actually there's promotional interviews that the brain gremlin did in the lead up to Gremlins 2 being released with interviewers in real life, right? We have one of the stars of Gremlin 2 right here, and it's a gremlin being interviewed. It's awesome, right? But this is what happens in Gremlins 2. They have all of these weird gremlin characters, and they've decided that's what they want to spend their money on. That's what they want to do with this. So they have the gremlins that are just messing up everything in the building, waiting for nightfall to be able to leave the building and wreak havoc on New York City. That's what Gremlins 2 spent their money on. Hobgoblins 2, they're still the same hobgoblins. There isn't a girl one with big boobs, right? There isn't an electricity hobgoblin. They just have that switch to being an agent of fear.
Now, to be fair, Gremlins 2 had a phenomenally higher budget than Hobgoblins 2.
Totally. And essentially, they said to the director of Gremlins 1, we want a sequel. Do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Do whatever you want. We have the budget. Here's the money. This is going to make $1 billion for us. It didn't make quite that much, but this is going to make a lot of money for us.
No, it didn't.
Here's the budget. Do what you want.
It did not make them a lot of money by any stretch of the imagination, but it has ended up being kind of a cult favorite. And I think a lot of people really love Gremlins 2 for just how over the top it all is. But we have to get to the important thing here, which is that Joe Dante, director of Gremlins and Gremlins 2, famously, and perhaps slightly exaggeratedly, hates Mystery Science Theater 3000.
What?
A hatred that seems to have arisen because of MST3K the movie and how aggressively it edited This Island Earth and how it even chose This Island Earth, which is not that bad a film by any stretch of the imagination. But they wanted a not that bad film in order to make the movie more tolerable to people, etc.
Sure.
Yeah. And they cut it down very aggressively, right? So, which made it look like a less coherent film than it actually is. Joe Dante found this ridiculous and disrespectful, and that seems to have put a real bug up him about MST3K in general. So that's Joe Dante on the one side. On the other side, we have Rick Sloan, who submitted one of his movies to MST3K for their consideration. Not this movie, not Hobgoblins. He sent in a film of his called The Visitants, and they said, no, this is a little too intentionally wink-winky. Do you have anything else? And then he sent Hobgoblins, and that's how Hobgoblins got to be on the show.
No way! Well, it's a good choice.
So we've got a director who does not like MST3K at all, but makes good movies, and one that likes MST3K quite a lot and makes not so good movies. Who wins here in the People's Court?
Man, it's so hard. I think, Chris, that our personal deck is stacked for people who are pro MST3K, but also I think we both appreciate good movies. Why can't it be both, Chris? Come on, isn't there a director out there who makes good movies and likes MST3K?
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 peeks into killer fantasies, all about today's episode, Hobgoblins. Go, Chris, go!
In addition to the Hobgoblins films, director Rick Sloan is perhaps best known for the made-for-basic cable Vice Academy series of films. What if Police Academy, but the cadets were sexy women? They sound really, really bad, and I would like a full report on all 6 movies on my desk by Monday, thank you.
Road Rash, the bouncer at Club Scum, is played by Dwayne Whitaker, who you might recognize from Pulp Fiction, where he played a pawn shop owner who... You know what? I'm not going to say anything more about that scene. So, oh, hey, he was also in an episode of Murder, She Wrote.
Some of our listeners might also recognize Darren Norris, the MC at Club Scum, who played the janitor on Ned's Declassified School Survivor Guide, and who has done a ton of voice acting, including roles on The Fairly Odd Parents. I am far too old to know any of that stuff, but I am exactly the right age to be amused that he was cast as the lead in a biopic about Phil Hartman that has not yet been made, to be directed by Jason Priestley. What?
Tammy Clatterbuck, who appears here as a phone sex operator, has a blink and you'll miss it role in Weird Al Yankovic's film UHF, where she plays a dominatrix as one of the guests on a Geraldo-like talk show. Most of you listening to this probably don't care at all about a Hobgoblins UHF connection, but I bet some of you just got very, very excited. And if that's you, I see you, and you are valid.
Our random band in this movie is The Fontanelles. Based in Long Beach, California, The Fontanelles managed to record some demos and put out one single before being cast in Hobgoblins. And after Hobgoblins, they puttered on for a few years without releasing anything else. Eventually, the guitarist went on to do sound work on Wheel of Fortune, and the singer and his husband now own a bar in San Francisco. So, that's nice.
Robert Palmer's 1986 song, I Didn't Mean to Turn You On, was originally recorded 2 years earlier by Cherelle. That recording was an R&B hit that only grazed the top 100 pop charts. The song was written and produced by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, the legendary team behind Janet Jackson's classic hits, and Cherelle's version has their sonic fingerprints all over it. Link in the show notes.
After the epic lawn battle between our hero and the military dude, Mike says,
Whew, there hasn't been such a glorious battle since the Arnold Stang-Wally Cox fight of 1958.
Arnold Stang was a comedian who provided the voice of Top Cat and the Honey Nut Cheerios bee. Wally Cox was a comedian who starred as a high school science teacher in the early TV show Mr. Peepers and provided the voice of Underdog. They both wore glasses, and neither was particularly scrappy.
The older security guard describes when the Hobgoblins first landed, and in the flashback, we see him reading a magazine with a prominent ad for The Visitants. As we mentioned, The Visitants was a 1986 movie directed by Hobgoblins director Rick Sloan. Anyway, the flashback is supposed to take place 30 years before the rest of the movie is set, which means this movie, like all terrible things, is set in 2016.
Back at the house, someone puts on a record and...
Hey
Hey, don't scratch the quarter flash.
Quarter Flash is the band behind the 1981 hit Harden My Heart. And, like the band that Charlotte and I used to be in, Quarter Flash hailed from Portland, Oregon. The band played their last show in... am I reading this right? 2019? Anyway, Quarter Flash was led by a married couple, Rindy and Marv Ross, who promise they'll still be playing shows together, so, keep an eye out for that.
And while they dance to store-brand Quarter Flash, Crow quips,
I think we stumbled onto Mel's rock pile.
Mel's Rock Pile was the American Bandstand-style show on SCTV, with Eugene Levy as Rockin' Mel Slurrup. So there, a little Portland, a little CanCon. I think we've checked all the boxes, right?
As our hero Kevin makes a blatantly choreographed attack with a pipe, Mike giggles and says,
It's an Agnes DeMille dream ballet.
Agnes DeMille was a major American dancer and choreographer. Amongst many, many other things, she did the choreography for Oklahoma, including the 15-minute dream ballet in the middle of the film, a highly stylized dance sequence without singing or dialogue.
When Kevin and the gang approach Club Scum, there's a random guy scowling in the background, and Tom excitedly exclaims,
Gary Gaetti.
And now that I've looked him up, I guess that rando does look a little like 80s and 90s baseballer Gary Gaetti. Gaetti spent his best years playing for the Minnesota Twins, but left the team in 1990, meaning he never really had a chance to be invited for a random cameo on MST3K. Oh well.
And finally, towards the end of the film, Crow says,
Still, you could make a case that this is a better film than Roadhouse.
Yeah.
Which is weird, right? Because in Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, Crow says that Roadhouse is his favorite film. Oh well, I guess a robot's tastes are allowed to change.
And that's time.
This movie is about hobgoblins, or so we're told.
Yeah, and it seems to me like if Gremlins, which is based on a creature that already existed, right? And then they made a movie in which Gremlins, did hobgoblins exist before, and they're just pulling in something from a grim fairy tale or something?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Hobgoblins are a thing in, fantasy, legends, etc. I first heard of them because of D&D, right?
Oh!
And actually, they've been on my mind recently because there is an actual play show that I really like that I watch called Dimension 20, and in a relatively recent series of it called A Court of Fae and Flowers, which is absolutely fantastic. Great place to start your Dimension 20 journey if you're into that sort of thing. One of the characters is a hobgoblin named Major K.P. Hobb. And it's a delightful role. Brendan Lee Mulligan plays it. It's fantastic. Oh, it's really good. It's really good. The whole thing is completely delightful. It's fantasy mixed with Regency era politicking at a court kind of thing.
Oh,
it's
my
just
gosh.
fun, and complete delight. But this description of a hobgoblin as this little scampering creature who's there to frighten in this just has had my mind thinking of, wait, what exactly are hobgoblins? What are they?
Yeah. And are they related to goblins? Because goblins is a thing too, right?
Yes, goblins is a thing.
Well, I mean, goblins are a thing. Are hobgoblins just like hobbits are half-sized people, right? That's not quite what they are, but essentially a hobbit is related to a humanoid and they're just slightly smaller and live different lives, right? Because of all of the differences between them. So is a hobgoblin just a smaller goblin?
In D&D, no. A hobgoblin is actually a bigger goblin.
Oh, man, but I want it to be a hobbit, right? It's shorter. It's smaller. It's just a bit.
Well, so in D&D, you've got goblins, which are little evil things that gather in large numbers in abandoned places and wreak havoc on things. Then you've got hobgoblins, which are a little bit bigger. They're more military. They organize things. They get the goblins sometimes to work for them and fight for them and so forth. And then bigger than that, the biggest of the goblin kin are bugbears, who are more solitary and bullying. And, they might be hired or convinced by a hobgoblin to work for them in their military efforts and so forth.
A bugbear?
I know, it's the most confusing thing. It's called a bugbear. But this actually kind of makes sense from where these things originate from outside of D&D, because a bugbear is also a term for like a scary thing. Like, there's a real bugbear bothering me.
I have never heard that before, Chris. Really? That's a saying?
It is a source of dread or an irritation. Yeah. Huh. I don't know if you've ever heard the term bugaboo or something like that.
Well, of course I've heard bugaboo. It's like in a Jungle Book song, but I've never heard bugbear. That's so interesting. I'm going to have to start using that in this spooky season we're in.
Bugaboo is just a fun way of saying bugbear.
Well, it is super fun.
It is. So this comes out of Tolkien, as so many things in D&D do. Tolkien mentions hobgoblins in the author's note of The Hobbit.
Okay.
Where he refers to goblins as being orcs and as hobgoblins as large orcs. And I'm going to quote him here. Orc is not an English word. It occurs in one or two places, but is usually translated goblin or hobgoblin for the larger kinds. Orc is the hobbit's form of the name given at that time to these creatures, and it is not connected at all with our orc, or ORC or ORK, applied to sea animals of dolphin kind, in other words, orca.
Oh. Well, I was just going to say, like, my mind just went to, like, a scary place where there are aquatic versions of the orcs from Lord of the Rings that are terrorizing our oceans. But no, that's not what they are. It's really good that Tolkien drew that distinction for me so that my scary place could be shut down immediately. Good job.
You say that an Esther Williams adaptation of Lord of the Rings sounds amazing.
Stop it. Oh my gosh. Somebody needs to write that. I think we know somebody who writes. Like, we could make that happen. It could be on Mystery Science Theater 3000. We could be the director that really loves Mystery Science Theater 3000 and makes good movies. Could we do that?
So Gandalf mentions hobgoblins again later in The Hobbit in passing. And that's all well and good. This seems to be where this idea came from for D&D. But Tolkien would later write a letter, like much later, like 1971, I think it is. He will write a letter mentioning that in folklore, hobgoblins are not big goblins. They're, in fact, little fey creatures that do odd jobs around the house.
Oh.
Small, hairy men that if you leave them food, they might do some tidying up for you.
I thought those were brownies.
They're very related to brownies. They're the same kind of thing. And in fact, there are some well-known hobgoblins in literature that you may be familiar with. One of them is a little guy named Puck, who is referred to as a hobgoblin in Midsummer Night's Dream.
Oh, well, look at that. I always think of him as being more related to like a cross between Peter Pan and a satyr without the like phallic stuff.
Yeah. I mean, he's referred to as a hobgoblin, but these terms sort of change over time, right? As some people started, let's say Puritans, started thinking them as like evil more and more, as somehow associated with devilry and devilment. They're practical jokers. They might shapeshift. They might do fey creature nonsense to you.
Anything that helps you with your housework is not evil. Like, can I just lay that down? It is crappy that there's a little thing that lives inside of your house and wants to help you with your housework, and you got to make it evil, so now the women have to do more work. Like, fuck you, man. That sucks.
Yeah, I think Roombas are technically classified as hobgoblins now.
Oh, the Puritans would never have allowed that in their home. You have got to be kidding me. Like, get a broom, man. Come on.
Well, Charlotte, we've done a good job with Halloween, and we've done a good job with this scary, scary movie called Hobgoblins. And I know I'm going to dress as a hobgoblin for Halloween this year.
Are you really?
I'm probably going to keep my mouth shut and not move very much.
You know what? You could just dress like Daphne and have a little stuffed toy that you wrestle.
It's very kind of you to think that I could make any of Daphne's outfits work.
She's got a kicky little tutu type thing happening. It's fabulous. You could pull it off.
She's great. I'd probably rather go as a Club Scum MC, but so it goes.
Heck yeah, you could totally pull that off, Chris.
Can you be Penny or Peggy or whatever her name is with the big bouffant hair?
No, I don't have enough hair, but I do love her dancing.
That's not real hair. Come on.
Sure, but I also don't have anything to create a beehive hair, you know?
I think they're like $5 on Amazon, but okay. Pixie, that's your name, Pixie.
Yeah. Pixie, yes, thank you.
What were we saying? I think we're wrapping up and you have a final factoid you want to talk about.
Oh, I do. You're totally right. And it's not about our costumes. It's about a car. Not the car that blows up, but the car that they actually do drive away in from their, 1-bedroom house to Reputation Road. Because I think that car, Chris, is an AMC Eagle.
So not the van, but the sportier car that they push over the edge. Or try to push over the edge.
Yes, let's call it sporty. It looks kind of like a station wagon, but it's not quite as long as a station wagon. It's kind of a slightly more compact look, but it does look like it has a couple of front seats, a back seat, and then kind of a wagon back, but not like a hatchback. It almost looks like an early SUV, which is what an AMC Eagle was. It was what is possibly the first crossover vehicle before crossover vehicles were like a thing in the late 90s and stuff. The AMC Eagle is what I learned to drive on. It's what my mom owned when I was learning how to drive.
So was it a good car to learn how to drive in?
Yes. First off, it was automatic, which if you're learning how to drive on automatic is much easier than learning on a manual transmission. Second, it was really sturdy. And I know this because, like a lot of drivers, I drove it and had an accident. And it spun around, but it didn't break. And I didn't get hurt. And I could drive it after the accident. And the person who hit me had a lot of damage to the front of their car, because their car absorbed the damage. Now, of course, I'm very happy to have the cars that I have now because I'm happy to have my car accordion and protect me. That's totally fine. The AMC Eagle just spun me around a little bit. Whatever. Getting in accidents is horrible. I hope anybody who's listening to this doesn't ever have to do it because it is really, really heartrending. But I was very happy to have a car that kept me protected. So one of the other things, though, and why the AMC Eagle is worth bringing up in this episode is that the AMC Eagle was a competitor of the Gremlin.
Well, that's too perfect.
Too perfect. Too perfect.
Who put out the Gremlin?
Oh my God, I don't even know. Datsun? I haven't any idea.
It was an AMC Gremlin. It wasn't a competitor. It was another product by the same company.
So there you go. But it is a competitor.
Yes. Okay. I don't know what we've learned here, but that's good. If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you want to gobble a hobgoblin, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our email is info@itsjustashow.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And, see pictures of your cool Halloween costumes. That's also nice. This show is made possible by listeners just like you and like our randomly selected supporter, Sean. Thank you, Sean. For as little as $1 an episode, you can be just like Sean. You can help us research and record this show. You can hang out with us in a friendly Discord, and you can listen to all our super fan bonus bits. Go find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/142.
By the time we get to our next movie, Chris, we're going to be outside of spooky season. So no more hobgoblins, no more gremlins. What are we watching next?
We're going to be going into the skies as we go on a manhunt in space from season 4, episode 13, Manhunt in Space, with the short General Hospital.
Ooh, General Hospital Part 1?
Well, I mean, it's General Hospital. Right, it's the soap opera. So, yeah, it's the first of the 3 General Hospital segments that were on the show.
Nice.
Yeah, looking forward to this one.
I don't remember if I've seen this before, but if I have, I've seen it with you, so it'll bring back fond memories of watching MST3K together.
All right, but until then,
I don't want you to throw your life away the way I had to. Destroy your life in your own way.
Slutting's fun, isn't it? Take it away, Theme Squad.